A 10-year-old black boy boards a plane with his mother. He's polite, quiet, just another child excited for the journey ahead. But somewhere over the clouds, something unthinkable happens. A senior flight attendant strikes him across the face. No warning, no reason, just a moment fueled by power and prejudice. The cabin goes silent. But what if I told you? The boy didn't scream. What if I told you? His silence would shake the entire airline industry. And what if I told you? The man seated just a few rows behind his father owned more of that airline than anyone else on board. This isn't just a story about injustice. It's about quiet strength, buried truths, and the moment the world had to decide whether to look away or listen. What would you do if the world saw your child humiliated? Would you fight back with fury or with something even more powerful? This is the true story of Ezra Dorian. And what happened next changed everything. If you believe stories like this matter, please like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The sound cracked through the air like a firecracker. It wasn't loud because of volume. It was loud because of silence. A single sharp slap, the kind that doesn't echo down the cabin, but freezes every muscle and makes time stop for half a second. Conversations halted. Plastic cups tilted in hands. A baby stopped mid-whimper. Every eye in first class turned. There he was. A boy. 10 years old. Maybe. Brown skin. Hoodie a bit too large for his small frame. His hand rested gently on his cheek, just under his left eye. The mark hadn't formed yet, but the outline of a red palm was already blooming. The woman standing in front of him, uniform pressed crisp. Name tag gleaming, was trembling slightly. Not from fear, from anger. She had just hit him. "You do not belong in this cabin," she hissed, her voice low, yet slicing. "You know better than to sneak up here. You people always try it. You people. 2 words. 100 years of wait." The boy's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. He just looked up at her, hurt, but more confused than anything else. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even trembling. He looked like he had seen this before, like this wasn't new. Row 5. A man in a tailored navy suit with calm eyes and hands folded in his lap didn't move. He had watched everything. His tray table was down. A slim black notebook rested beside a glass of still water. He lifted his phone, opened the camera, pressed record, and then he waited. The woman who had struck the boy adjusted her posture and looked around nervously. Eyes were on her now. Some passengers turned their gaze away. A few whispered to each other. A man in 3C looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't. The boy seat 1A stepped back slowly. His foot caught the corner of a carry-on bag, and he stumbled slightly. She didn't help him. He walked quietly back to his seat. Sat down. The woman stood frozen, breathing heavy, clutching her notepad too tightly. In row 5, the man put down his phone. He glanced toward the window, gathering himself. He didn't storm forward. He didn't shout. He didn't demand. Instead, he inhaled deeply, eyes closed. Not here. Not now. Not like this. The overhead speakers crackled gently. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into JFK shortly. Please return to your seats and ensure all tray tables are stowed. We'll be landing in approximately 25 minutes." The woman, her name tag read Sharon, walked quickly toward the galley. Shoulders tight. The cabin stirred slowly back to life, but the tension remained. The boy seat 1A gazed out the window, blinking slowly. He didn't look at anyone, didn't look behind him. Just the clouds, folding like waves outside. The man in row 5 checked his watch, then checked the timestamp on his video. He whispered quietly to himself, 22 minutes to ground. Sharon returned a minute later, clutching a service sheet. She avoided looking at 1A, but passengers watched her now. Eyes followed her. There had been stories, but they were just whispers. This one wasn't a whisper. It had a witness and a recording. And what Sharon didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the man in row 5, the one with the calm eyes and folded hands, the one who had recorded the whole thing, was the owner of the airline. He wasn't just a businessman. He was Malcolm Dorian, chairman and CEO of Dorian Logistics. And 3 months ago, Dorian Logistics had acquired controlling interest in Summit Air. Malcolm had boarded this flight not as a boss, but as a father. A quiet test, a lesson for his son, Ezra, who had insisted he was ready to fly alone. Malcolm had agreed, reluctantly. He would sit back in row 5. Ezra would tug 1A. No one would know. No introductions, no special treatment, just a boy in first class. He wanted to see how the world treated his son when the world didn't know his last name. And now, he had his answer. But the test wasn't over yet. The world wasn't watching yet. The reckoning would come. But not on this plane. Not with fury. With strategy. With purpose. Because Malcolm Dorian didn't move out of anger. He moved with change. 3 days before the slap, Malcolm Dorian stood in the corner of his son's bedroom, quietly observing. Ezra was packing. Not toys or tablets, not snacks or comics. He was packing a small leather-bound journal, a well-worn paperback novel about space travel, and a pair of noise-canceling headphones with a scratch down the left ear. Malcolm smiled faintly. Ezra's attention to detail reminded him of his younger self. "You sure you want to sit by yourself?" Malcolm asked, leaning against the doorframe. Ezra looked up. His dark brown eyes held something older than his years. "I think so," he said. "You said first class is for anyone who earns it." "Right." Malcolm crossed the room, knelt down. "That's right. But not everyone believes that yet." Ezra zipped up his backpack. "I want to know what it's like when no one knows who I am." Malcolm nodded slowly. "You'll get the full picture," he said. "But if anything happens, anything at all, you text me. I'll be 5 rows behind you." Ezra hesitated. "You won't step in unless it's serious, right?" Malcolm studied him. "No. I won't. This is your experience. I trust you to handle it, but I'll be watching." Ezra gave a nervous smile. "Deal." That deal made in a quiet bedroom filled with morning light was what kept Malcolm seated in 5D when his son was slapped. That moment in the cabin, the silence, the crack of skin, the wave of shame, it all led back to this room, this test, this choice. Malcolm remembered the day he first sat in first class. Years ago. He was 26, newly funded, the only black man in a row of executives in pinstripe suits. He wore a beige blazer that didn't quite fit and shoes he had polished 3 times the night before. The flight attendant had smiled tightly and offered him water. No welcome champagne, no menu, no eye contact after takeoff. And when turbulence hit and he accidentally pressed the call button, she walked past him twice before asking, "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" That moment had never left him. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed something he had always suspected. Success would not shield him, as it might only make the scrutiny sharper. Now he sat in 5D, watching his son go through the same fire. Except Ezra was 10, and that made it unbearable. After the slap, Malcolm had recorded the moment. Yes. But what truly broke him was the expression on Ezra's face. He didn't look surprised. He looked practiced, like he knew how to disappear without leaving the room. And that, more than anything, was what Malcolm could not forgive. The descent into JFK was slow. Outside, clouds rolled like gray silk. The city below began to take shape. Ezra's head was turned to the window, chin resting in his palm. He hadn't moved much since returning to 1A. Malcolm wanted to go to him, but this was still part of the test. A new part, one neither of them had prepared for. A flight attendant, not Sharon, walked down the aisle with a tray of mints and hot towels. She paused at 1A, offered Ezra a towel with a warm smile. He took it politely, nodded, still no words. The attendant moved on. Malcolm turned his eyes back to his notebook. He wrote a single sentence. If we protect them from everything, how will they know what needs to change? The aircraft touched down with a soft bounce. Passengers applauded lightly. The usual chorus of clicking seatbelts followed. Sharon stood stiffly by the front galley, thanking passengers as they exited. Her smile was practiced, her voice tight. When Ezra passed her, he did not speak. He only looked at her, and it was not the look of a child. It was the look of someone who had been measured and marked. Malcolm exited last. When he stepped forward, Sharon's smile dropped. He met her gaze evenly. He did not blink. He did not nod. He simply said, "Stay close. You'll be needed shortly." Then he walked past. Sharon stood frozen, 10 feet ahead. Malcolm reached out and gently touched Ezra's shoulder. "You okay?" Ezra nodded. Malcolm crouched slightly, looked him in the eyes. "You handled yourself with strength." Ezra's voice was soft. "I didn't want to cry. I thought maybe if I just stayed calm, it would end." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have had to do anything, but you stayed true to yourself. That matters." Ezra hesitated. "Are you going to fire her?" Malcolm didn't answer right away. Instead, he placed his hand over Ezra's heart. "I'm going to listen, then I'll decide what justice really looks like." As they stepped into the terminal, a poised woman in a gray suit approached. "Nadine Parks," she said, "Regional Operations Director." Malcolm shook her hand. "Meeting room ready?" "Yes, sir. Crew has been instructed to remain. I've also secured the footage from cabin cameras, just in case." Malcolm nodded. Ezra looked up at her. "Are you going to be there too?" She smiled gently. "If your father wants me there." "Yes." "I want her there," Malcolm said. "And I want one more person too." He looked around the terminal. A few feet away stood Rachel Mendez, the other attendant, the one who had offered Ezra water. Malcolm beckoned her forward. "Would you be willing to join us?" Rachel hesitated, glanced at Sharon still standing by the gate, pale and stiff. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, I would. Together." They walked toward the executive conference room, Ezra in the center, 2 women on either side, and Malcolm, a step behind. Not towering, not commanding, just steady, unmoving. A father following his son into the space where power meets accountability. And behind them, a storm quietly waited. 2 hours before the slap, Ezra Dorian had stood quietly at gate 37A, clutching his boarding pass. The noise of the terminal faded in and out. Overhead announcements, rolling suitcases, hushed phone calls, and laughing toddlers. But Ezra was still. He wore a charcoal hoodie with a blue stripe down the sleeve and black sneakers that were just slightly too clean. His backpack was heavy but balanced. Inside, His journal was zipped in a mesh pocket next to a small bag of pretzels and a folded photo of him and his father at the beach last summer. Pre-boarding now for passengers requiring assistance and families with young children. Ezra stepped forward. The gate agent glanced at him, then did a double take. "You with someone?" "Sweetie, no. I'm traveling alone. First class. Seat 1A. The agent blinked. "Are you sure?" Ezra held up his boarding pass. The barcode was crisp. The name was clear. Ezra Dorian. She scanned it. The device beeped with a green light. She smiled tightly. "All right. Go on ahead." As Ezra walked down the jet bridge, she turned to her colleague and said under her breath, "That's a new one. Inside the cabin." The overhead lights glowed with a soft amber hue, the kind meant to signal calm and luxury. A faint smell of lemon cleaner hung in the air. Ezra stepped into first class. The first thing he noticed was the silence, not the absence of noise, the absence of welcome. No one greeted him, no one smiled. The passengers already seated barely glanced up. A woman in 2D looked directly at him and frowned. She shifted her purse to the empty seat beside her, then turned away. Ezra found his seat, 1A, a window seat. He set his bag on the floor, careful not to scuff the leather. A moment later, footsteps approached. "Excuse me." Ezra looked up. It was her, the woman from the slap. Sharon Pike. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight twist. Her makeup was neat. Her tone was clipped. "Are you lost?" Honey Ezra shook his head. "This is my seat." She looked at the boarding pass in his hand, but did not take it. Can I see that he handed it to her? She stared at it longer than necessary, then looked at him again. "First class." "Yes, ma'am." Her lips tightened. "All right." She returned the pass, turned on her heel, and walked toward the galley. Ezra sank into his seat. He took out his headphones, but didn't put them on yet. Something in the air had shifted. It wasn't direct, not yet, but it was there, a low current under the surface. A few minutes passed. More passengers boarded. A man in 3A with a Bluetooth headset. A woman in designer glasses and a navy dress who gave Ezra a curious glance but said nothing. Still no one spoke to him. Until she came back. Sharon. She moved down the aisle with a tray of welcome drinks, champagne flutes, sparkling water, towels on tongs. She offered one to the man in 2A, smiled. "Would you like a mimosa?" "Sir." "Sure. Thank you." She handed it over with practiced grace, then turned to Ezra. Without smiling. Without a towel. She placed a plastic cup of warm water on his tray and walked away. Ezra blinked. No choice. No question. Just water. He glanced down the aisle. The other passengers had real glasses. The kind that clinked. The kind that said you belonged here. He didn't sip it. He just looked at it. A moment later, another flight attendant walked past. Rachel Mendez. She was younger, maybe early 30s, black. Her hair was braided neatly and pulled into a low bun. She noticed the plastic cup immediately. Her eyes flicked from the water to Ezra's face. She said nothing, but she gave him a small nod. And Ezra, surprised, nodded back. The cabin prepared for takeoff. Announcements rolled through the speakers. Seat belts, life vests, no smoking. Ezra watched the sky through the small round window as the plane lifted above the clouds. A few minutes after takeoff, Sharon returned down the aisle. She handed menus to the passengers, one by one. She skipped 1A. Ezra watched her hand one to the woman beside him, watched her look directly past him, and still, he said nothing. Still. He waited. Malcolm watched it all from row 5. He had seen the water, seen the missing towel, seen the absent menu. He had written 3 notes in his notebook already. He didn't interfere. Not yet. His plan had been to observe. But even with all his preparation, something was breaking inside him. Watching his son shrink, not physically, but inwardly. His posture had changed. Ezra wasn't sitting like a kid excited to fly alone anymore. He was sitting like someone trying not to be seen. Malcolm had seen that posture before. In boardrooms where he was the only black man at the table, in restaurants where the waiter asked if he was waiting for someone else, in high school, when a teacher asked if he was sure he belonged in the honors class. And now he saw it in his son. And that made his hands shake, quietly, under the tray. He clenched his fingers, wrote one more line in his notebook. Bias doesn't need shouting. It just needs silence. When turbulence shook the cabin an hour later, Sharon returned to check on the passengers. She passed Ezra again. Didn't ask if he was okay. Didn't offer a drink. And when Ezra stood to use the bathroom, stumbled slightly and brushed her arm. That's when she snapped. The slap was not spontaneous. It was the crescendo of an entire song she had been humming under her breath since boarding. A song of quiet judgment and unspoken rules. And Ezra had heard every note. The seatbelt sign pinged on. The turbulence had started gently, just the usual bumps, like potholes in the clouds. Ezra barely noticed at first, but then the overhead lights flickered once. Then again. The cabin seemed to shift uneasily, like it was holding its breath. He tightened the strap across his lap. A voice came over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're hitting a mild patch of turbulence. Please remain seated with your belts fastened. Cabin service is temporarily suspended." Sharon's voice, firm, unbothered, controlled. The cart squeaked as she rolled it back into the galley. Rachel helped secure it. The clink of glass against metal echoed faintly as the plane jostled again. Ezra looked around. Everyone else seemed calm, but his stomach felt tight. He needed the restroom. He hesitated, then decided to go quickly before the turbulence got worse. He stood up carefully. The cabin tilted again. His foot shifted, and his balance wobbled, just slightly. He reached out instinctively and brushed the back of Sharon's arm as she turned from the galley. That was the moment. She spun around fast, eyes wide, face flushed. "What do you think you're doing?" she barked. Ezra blinked, startled. "I'm just going to the bathroom," he said quietly. Sharon stepped toward him. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, cold. "You're not allowed to be up here." "Where are your parents?" Ezra's voice caught. "This is my seat. I'm in 1A. She didn't believe him, didn't check the manifest, didn't ask for proof. She just reacted. "No, you're not." "I am," he insisted, voice firmer now. "You came up from the back, didn't you? Sneaking into first class. You people always think you're owed something." Ezra froze. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the words or the tone, the disgust in her voice, like he had brought something dirty into her space. "I'm not sneaking," he whispered. "I'm supposed to be here." But she wasn't listening. Not to his words, not to his eyes, not to the way his hands stayed respectfully at his sides. She stepped closer. Too close. And with a flick of her wrist, she slapped him, right across the cheek. It wasn't a full-force hit, but it landed with enough power to make the boy's head jerk slightly to the side. A gasp came from someone in row 2. The woman in 2D dropped her drink. Glass shattered on the floor. Someone else muttered, "Oh my God." But no one moved. No one said a word to Sharon. Ezra looked straight ahead. Not at her. Not at the passengers. Just at the wall in front of him. He didn't cry. His lips parted, as if to speak. But nothing came. He turned silently and walked back to seat 1A. Sat down, folded his hands in his lap, did not touch his cheek, did not ask for help. In row 5, Malcolm Dorian had watched it all. He didn't blink, didn't exhale. He had lifted his phone the moment Sharon raised her voice. The slap was captured clearly. The words, the look on her face, the sting of skin against skin. He kept the phone recording for another 30 seconds, then set it down carefully. His hands trembled slightly, but his face was calm. He stared straight ahead. Inside, his heart screamed. Every cell in his body told him to stand, to shout, to walk up and take his son in his arms. But he didn't, because Ezra had turned to face something alone. Because this was no longer just about one boy. This was about every child who had been told they didn't belong. Every quiet humiliation. Every time someone looked past them and saw nothing but what they expected. Malcolm closed his eyes. He remembered being 12, being stopped by a mall security guard who accused him of stealing gum. He hadn't. He was holding a science magazine, but they made him empty his backpack anyway, in front of everyone, and afterward. His father had said, "You handled it with grace, but I wish you hadn't had to." Now Malcolm understood what his father had felt then, that quiet ache, that slow-burning fury, but also that desire for something more than revenge, a desire for change. In the galley, Sharon was rattled. She hadn't expected an audience. She thought the boy would back down, disappear, that no one would care. Now she could feel eyes on her, passengers whispering. Rachel stood nearby, silent. She said nothing, but her face said everything. Rachel had watched it all, heard the slap, seen the boy's reaction, and now she stood at the edge of a decision. Speak up or stay silent. Ezra sat still, his cheek red, his fingers now gripping the edge of the seat. His chest moved gently, in and out. His eyes blinked slowly, staring at the clouds. From row 5, Malcolm typed a short message into his phone. Begin silent protocol. Secure cabin roster. No media. Regional director to meet at arrival. He sent it, then leaned back, closed his notebook, and whispered, "It begins now." The cabin had gone quiet, not in the way flights grow silent during movies or naps. This silence was heavier. It was a kind of stillness that followed something no one quite knew how to process. The kind that didn't ask for answers but sat in every aisle like a shadow. Ezra sat perfectly still in 1A. His cheek still burned, but he didn't touch it. The redness had settled into a dull blush, visible even under the soft cabin lights. He blinked slowly, then looked out the window. Not at anything in particular, just away. The clouds were glowing with a tint of orange now. Sunset was starting to bleed into the horizon. Somewhere far below, the world continued, but up here, something had changed. Something sacred had been breached. Malcolm watched from 5D, his fingers gently interlocked on the tray table. He hadn't moved, hadn't said a word. His breathing was steady, but his jaw was locked. He had seen Ezra's strength, and it broke him, because no child should have to carry that kind of dignity at 10. Rachel Mendez stood by the galley divider, frozen halfway between duty and conscience. Her hands trembled at her sides. hidden behind her back. She glanced at Sharon, who was furiously scribbling notes on her service pad, probably trying to justify the unjustifiable. Rachel turned her gaze to Ezra. The boy hadn't looked at her, not since the moment it happened, but she felt his quiet disappointment. Not in her, not yet, but maybe in the world. And that was worse. Passengers shifted in their seats. Some stole glances. Others kept their heads down, pretending to be asleep, pretending they hadn't witnessed something ugly unfold just a few feet away. In row 2, the woman who had dropped her drink whispered to the man beside her. "Did that really just happen?" He nodded slowly, his lips tight, and did nothing, because no one knew what to do when power was abused in silence. Rachel took a deep breath. She stepped forward. Not far, just enough to break the spell. She approached Ezra gently, crouching to eye level, her voice soft and trembling. "Would you like something else to drink, sweetheart?" Ezra turned slowly toward her. His eyes were wide, not frightened, not angry, just tired. "No, thank you," he said, his voice quiet. Rachel nodded. "I'm sorry." Ezra didn't reply, but he didn't look away. That was enough. From row 5. Malcolm made note of it, a small act, a human one. Rachel Mendez had broken protocol, and broken it with heart. She would be remembered. Sharon, on the other hand, stood stiff at the rear galley now, arms folded, fuming not because she regretted what she'd done, but because people had seen. She whispered into her intercom to the captain, trying to frame the situation before anyone else could. "He's a disruptive, unaccompanied minor," she said. "I had to control the situation." The captain, confused, but busy navigating a congested descent into JFK, responded flatly. "Understood. Log it and we'll debrief on ground." She clicked the handset back into place and smoothed her uniform. To her, it was handled. To Malcolm, it had just begun. He opened his notebook again, wrote 3 names: Sharon Pike, Rachel Mendez, Ezra Dorian. Under Ezra's name, he wrote something else. He never raised his voice. He raised the standard. The plane began its descent. A soft voice from the cockpit informed passengers they would land in about 15 minutes. Outside, the skyline of New York glistened in the distance. Inside, the cabin remained tense. Sharon passed through the aisle once more, collecting empty cups. Her eyes avoided Ezra entirely. When she reached row 5, her gaze met Malcolm's for the first time. It was brief. She looked away fast, but something in his stillness unnerved her. There was no anger in his expression, just silence, and silence could be louder than rage. Ezra leaned against the window. His reflection stared back at him. He wondered if his mother would cry when she found out. He wondered if his dad was disappointed in him for not speaking up sooner. He wondered if this happened to other kids, to other boys with skin like his. The answers weren't clear, but one thing was, he would not forget this flight, and he would not forget how it felt to be stared at, like an intruder in a seat he had every right to claim. As the wheels touched down on the JFK runway with a soft thud, Ezra sat up straight. He was ready. Malcolm gently packed away his notebook and sent one more message from his phone. All documentation secured. Gate team in position. Escort prepared. Rachel walked down the aisle one last time. This time, she stopped at 1A again. She bent down, whispered, "You did nothing wrong." Ezra looked at her, nodded once. Behind her, Sharon rolled her eyes and muttered under her breath. He got what he deserved. It was barely audible. Barely. But Malcolm heard it. And so did Rachel. And that was the final mistake. The final thread snapped. The plane reached the gate. Ding. Seatbelts unclicked. People stood stretched, grabbed bags. But no one rushed off. Not this time. Because something hung in the air. They all felt it. Change was walking up the aisle, and she was not wearing a uniform. The cabin door opened with a hiss. A sudden wash of air from the jet bridge drifted in, cooler than the thick tension still lingering in the aisle. Sharon stood near the door, forcing a tight smile. She had reapplied her lipstick in the galley. Her uniform was crisp, her posture defensive. Passengers began filing out slowly. Some nodded politely. Others walked past with eyes averted. The woman from 2D paused briefly at the exit. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't be working with children." Sharon's smile cracked. Her hands clenched behind her back. She did not reply. Ezra stood in the aisle, backpack on his shoulder, staring at the open door. He had never been so close to walking away from something and wanting so badly to stay and fight it. Malcolm appeared behind him. "You ready?" he asked softly. Ezra nodded once. They stepped off together. At the end of the jet bridge stood a woman in a gray blazer and high bun, Nadine Parks, Regional Operations Director for the Airline's Northeastern Division. Her eyes landed on Ezra first. "Mr. Dorian," she said gently. "Ezra, I'm Nadine. I'm here to listen." Ezra said nothing, but he didn't look away. Malcolm gave her a firm nod. Behind them, Rachel Mendes exited quietly and joined the group. She looked tired, but resolute. Sharon came out last. She froze when she saw Nadine. "You didn't tell me corporate was involved." Malcolm's eyes flicked toward her. "I didn't think you'd need advance warning, unless there's something to hide." Sharon's jaw locked. "I followed procedure." Rachel turned to her. For the first time, her voice was steady but louder than before. "No, you didn't." Nadine gestured down the hallway. "This way, please. We've secured a private room. Passenger 1A and his guardian will speak first." Sharon stepped forward. "I have a right to representation." Nadine's tone remained professional. "You're not under investigation. Not yet. But you are under review, and you'll wait outside until we ask you in." Rachel followed Nadine, Malcolm, and Ezra down the hallway, while Sharon stood back, arms crossed, eyes scanning for an exit that wouldn't come. Inside the room, Ezra sat at the head of a small oval table. The windows looked out over the tarmac where planes glided like silent giants. Malcolm remained standing behind him. Nadine sat across, opened her notebook. Rachel stood near the door, her hands clasped in front of her. Ezra looked down at the table. Nadine gave him time. "Ezra," she began slowly, "you don't have to speak if you're not ready. But I want you to know this room belongs to you right now." Ezra lifted his head, and for the first time since he had boarded the plane, he let the weight inside him come forward. "She didn't think I belonged," he said. Nadine stayed quiet. She didn't ask for my name or my seat number. She just decided I wasn't supposed to be there. He paused. And when I stood up to go to the bathroom, she hit me. Rachel looked down. Malcolm closed his eyes for a moment. Nadine leaned in. "Thank you. Ezra, that was very brave." Ezra's voice trembled slightly. "I didn't do anything wrong, but she looked at me like I was already guilty. I've never felt smaller." Nadine nodded. Her hands remained still. "We're taking this seriously. We've reviewed the footage." The cabin mic picked up the slap and part of the exchange. Rachel stepped forward. "I saw it too. I should have spoken sooner. I thought someone else would step in, but no one did, and I will not make that mistake again." Ezra looked at her. This time, he smiled. Just a little. Nadine turned to Malcolm. "Would you like to add anything?" Sir Malcolm stepped forward. His tone was calm, but every word carried weight. "This isn't just about a slap. It's about what led to it. The looks, the silence, the missing menu, the plastic cup instead of glass, the assumptions." He took a breath. "You don't fix that with an apology. You fix it with structure, policy, culture." Nadine wrote something in her notes. Understood. At that moment, there was a knock. An assistant stepped in. "Ms. Parks, we have the captain and crew ready. Ms. Pike is requesting to speak." Nadine looked at Ezra. "Do you want to be present when she speaks?" Ezra hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Malcolm looked surprised, but said nothing. Moments later, Sharon Pike entered. She looked pale, but defiant. She sat across from Ezra, did not make eye contact. "I was following protocol," she said quickly. "He brushed against me. It startled me. I reacted. I've served 20 years without a single complaint." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You mean without one that made it past the paperwork?" Sharon turned to her. "Excuse me." Nadine lifted a hand. "Enough. Ms. Pike, are you denying you struck a minor?" Sharon paused. "I'm saying I didn't intend to hurt him." "That's not the question. I reacted instinctively." Malcolm stepped forward. "No. You reacted from bias, and Ezra is the one carrying the consequence." Sharon turned red. "You people always think it's about race." Ezra flinched. Malcolm's voice dropped low. "And yet you keep proving it is." The room fell into silence. Nadine stood. "Ms. Pike, you'll be placed on immediate suspension pending full investigation. Effective now." Sharon stood up quickly, panic flashing behind her eyes. "You can't do this. I have seniority." Nadine didn't flinch. "This is not about years of service. It's about one moment that told us everything we needed to know." Sharon looked at Ezra one last time, but he had already turned back to the window, and this time he smiled, because silence had finally ended, and truth had entered the room. The video was never supposed to go public. Malcolm had recorded it for documentation, not spectacle, for truth, not noise, but by morning it had leaked. Someone on the flight, maybe from row 2, maybe someone further back, had caught part of the incident on their phone too. The slap, the silence, the look on Ezra's face, and someone had posted it. 10 seconds, no context, no narration, just the sound of flesh on flesh, and a child flinching without a word. By 8:22 a.m., it had hit 30,000 views. By noon, it was at 1.2 million. The headline on one of the first viral tweets read, "Flight attendant slaps black child in first-class airline silent." Beneath it were thousands of comments. Some were outraged. Some were defensive. Some questioned if Ezra had provoked it. Others demanded the airline respond immediately. But one comment, buried halfway down the thread, stood out. It read, "He didn't even cry." That boy's silence was louder than any scream. In a quiet apartment in Brooklyn, Ezra sat on the couch, knees pulled to his chest, watching the news coverage through his fingers. He didn't want to be a headline. He didn't want to be a conversation. He just wanted to be a kid again. His mother, Yvette, sat beside him, holding his hand. Her grip was firm, but gentle. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered. Ezra looked up at her. "You didn't do anything wrong." She smiled faintly, tears in her eyes. Malcolm stood by the window, phone in hand, eyes scanning a stream of emails, requests for statements, invitations for interviews, outreach from journalists, activists, and legal advisors. He hadn't spoken to the press. Not yet. But the pressure was building. Across the city, at Airline headquarters, Nadine Parks sat in a boardroom with two other executives. Her voice was steady, but her frustration was clear. We need a response, a real one, not a template apology. The CEO, a polished man in his 50s with graying temples, rubbed his temples. I can't just throw Sharon under the bus. She assaulted a minor on camera, and she's claiming protocol. The union's already involved. She lied, on record. He sighed. We'll review the footage again, get legal involved. But in the meantime, can we reach out to the family? Nadine stared at him. Do you even know who the father is? The CEO looked up, confused. No. She leaned forward. Malcolm Dorian. The man froze. Wait, the Malcolm Dorian? Yes. Your largest private equity investor. Founder of Dorian Equity. Silent partner in half of your expansion routes. The room went still. Why didn't anyone tell me this? Yesterday I tried. You dismissed me. He stood quickly. Schedule a call. Now. Back in Brooklyn. Malcolm was already on the move. He had not taken a single interview, but that didn't mean he was quiet. He had a strategy, and it began with a closed-door meeting. At 3 p.m., he met with a group of civil rights attorneys, youth advocates, and aviation ethics consultants, not to make a scene, to make a change. Across the table, an advocate named Keisha Langston leaned in. You have an opportunity here, Malcolm, not just to protect your son, but to protect 1,000 more like him. Malcolm nodded. I know. Are you ready to be visible? That part took a moment. He had always worked in the shadows, moved funds quietly, shaped industries from behind mirrored glass. But now they had come for his son. I'm ready. Meanwhile, Ezra sat in his room, scrolling through his tablet. Dozens of messages poured in from classmates, teachers, even strangers. Some were kind, some were invasive. One simply said, "You're a hero." But Ezra didn't feel like a hero. He felt exposed. He turned the tablet off and stared at the ceiling. His thoughts swirled. He remembered how quiet the cabin was after it happened. He remembered the way people looked at him. Some with pity, some with fear, none with understanding. And he remembered Rachel, the flight attendant who didn't look away. That gave him a strange kind of hope. Downstairs, Malcolm returned home. Ezra met him at the bottom of the stairs. Are we going to court? Ezra asked. Malcolm paused. We might. Ezra looked down. I don't want everyone to see me like that. Malcolm knelt down. Like what, weak? Malcolm shook his head gently. You weren't weak. You were strong in the way the world needs most. You didn't hit back. You stood tall. Ezra's eyes filled slightly, but it still happened. Malcolm nodded. I know, and that's why we can't stay silent. He stood and opened a folder. Inside were documents, policy proposals, ethical accountability reforms, training protocols for flight staff. What is all this? Ezra asked. This is how we change it, for good. That night, Malcolm released a public statement. It wasn't a press conference. It wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet video, shot from his study, no tie, no filters, just truth. He spoke clearly. This is not about a bad employee. This is about a culture that permits people to see a black child in first class and assume a mistake has been made. He continued, "My son did not raise his voice. He did not retaliate. But today, his silence ends, and so does mine." The video went viral within an hour, not for its rage, but for its calm, for its clarity, and for the power behind it. By the next morning, the airline issued a second statement. It was no longer vague. They acknowledged wrongdoing, suspended Sharon indefinitely pending termination review, announced the formation of a task force on discrimination in aviation spaces, and invited Malcolm Dorian to lead it. He had not even asked. Ezra watched the announcement on TV. This time, when he smiled, it wasn't because the world was watching. It was because the world was finally listening. Monday came too fast. Ezra stood at the mirror, adjusting the collar of his shirt. His hands moved slowly, like he was getting dressed for something more serious than 5th grade. His mom leaned in the doorway. "You sure you want to go?" Ezra nodded. But it wasn't a strong nod, more like the kind that tries to convince itself. "I don't want to hide," he said. Yvette smiled, brushing a hand over his shoulder. "That's brave. But you know you don't owe anyone a performance." "I know." He didn't look up. She kissed his forehead. "Then go be exactly who you are. Nothing more, nothing less." The drive to school was quiet. Not awkward, just heavy. Outside the window, the city buzzed like nothing had happened. Delivery trucks from school buses, parents yelling reminders from car windows, all of it normal. But Ezra wasn't normal anymore. He was the boy from the video, the one who didn't cry, the one who didn't hit back, the one who became a symbol before he ever asked to be. At the school gate, Ezra hesitated. Kids turned to look. Some whispered, a few waved, but no one spoke directly to him. Not yet. Miss Granger, his teacher, met him just inside the door. Her voice was soft. "Ezra, we're glad to have you back." He nodded. She reached into a drawer and handed him a welcome back card the class had made. His name was written in bubble letters on the front. Inside, 20 signatures. Some messages. "Stay strong. You're amazing. You're a legend." Ezra smiled politely and placed it in his backpack. In his seat. He looked around. Every pair of eyes eventually found him. Some stared too long. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed. Lunch was worse. He sat with his usual group, but it felt different. Too quiet. His best friend Micah finally broke the silence. "My mom said what happened to you was disgusting." Ezra nodded. Micah continued, "She also said you should be proud. You started something big." Ezra peeled the wrapper from his sandwich slowly. "I didn't start anything. I was just there." Micah leaned in, whispering, "But now everyone knows your name." Ezra looked up. That's not always a good thing. In the bathroom later, Ezra stared at himself in the mirror. Same face, same eyes, same boy. But now, strangers online called him brave. Adults talked about him on the news, and classmates treated him like glass. Not because they didn't like him, because they were afraid they might say the wrong thing. He didn't blame them, but he missed being invisible. Back home. Malcolm sat in a meeting with senior airline staff. He had agreed to lead the new task force, but that didn't mean he was done watching how they moved. "This isn't about press," he told the board. "This is about policy. Ezra didn't need your sympathy. He needed your structure to prevent this." One executive nodded solemnly. "We're reviewing every part of our crew training process. We'll be rolling out anti-bias modules." Malcolm remained calm. "I'll help build them. But it won't matter if your people think bias is just a checkbox. Understood. Later that night, he came home to find Ezra on the balcony, wrapped in a hoodie. Malcolm pulled up a chair beside him. Neither spoke for a long while. The city lights blinked in silence. Finally, Ezra asked, "Why do people keep calling me brave?" Malcolm considered the question. "Because you were. But I didn't do anything. You did the hardest thing. You didn't retaliate. You stood still when the world expected you to fold." Ezra's voice was quiet. "I didn't feel brave. Sometimes we're brave even when we're scared. Especially then." Ezra pulled his knees up. "I just want to go back to before people knew me, before everything changed." Malcolm nodded slowly. "I know. But the truth is, son, the world was always like this. Now it just showed you a part of itself you hadn't seen yet." Ezra looked out toward the skyline. "Will it ever change?" Malcolm smiled faintly. "It already is. Because of you." There was a beat of silence. Then Ezra said something Malcolm hadn't expected. "I think I want to talk to the school. Not just our class. Like, everyone." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Ezra nodded. "I don't want them to remember me for the slap. I want them to understand why it happened, and how it made me feel, and how it made others feel too." Malcolm's chest tightened. It wasn't pride. It was something deeper. Respect. He placed a hand on Ezra's shoulder. "Then we'll help you do that." The next morning, Ms. Granger arranged a time during school assembly for Ezra to speak. She cleared it with the principal. They expected a few words, maybe a thank you, something safe. But Ezra stood on stage with a different kind of calm. He looked out at hundreds of eyes and said, "I'm not here because I'm special. I'm here because what happened to me happens to other kids all the time. The only difference is, someone recorded it." The room went still. He continued, "I didn't cry. But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt. I didn't scream. But that doesn't mean I was okay." He scanned the audience. "I know some of you don't know what to say. That's okay. But saying nothing when something's wrong makes the wrong feel normal. And it shouldn't be." When he stepped off the stage, the silence broke into applause. Not the loud, performative kind, the kind that carried weight. That said, "We heard you." That said, "We see you." Ezra walked back to his seat, heart pounding but steady. He wasn't invisible anymore, but he wasn't glass either. He was something stronger, and he was just getting started. For a moment, things felt like they were getting better. The video had sparked a national conversation. The airline had issued its apology and suspended the flight attendant. Ezra's speech at school had gone viral in its own right. Not because it was loud, but because it was honest. But then came the pushback. It started small. A few anonymous emails to the school. A couple of angry calls to Malcolm's office from blocked numbers. Then came the online comments. The kind that hid behind fake profiles and blurred profile pictures. "You're raising a victim. This kid just wants attention." Another soft generation looking to cancel people over nothing. At first, Malcolm ignored them, but they kept growing. Then someone leaked the name of the school Ezra attended, and the tone shifted. Ezra's principal called an emergency meeting with Yvette and Malcolm. "We're getting pressure," she said quietly, hands folded tightly in front of her. "Some parents are concerned about safety. They're requesting Ezra take a leave of absence." Yvette's voice was cold and sharp. "For what?" "For being slapped." The principal didn't answer. She didn't have to. Malcolm stood. "My son stays, or this school faces a legal and public reckoning you're not prepared for." The principal nodded slowly. Understood. That night, Malcolm stood on the balcony alone, staring at the skyline. He had known this would happen. Visibility always came with a cost, especially when truth was inconvenient. Inside, Ezra sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a stack of mail. Most of it was junk. A few envelopes from law firms, a typed invitation to speak at a youth leadership event, and then there was the letter. It had no return address. The envelope was cream-colored, thick paper. Inside, a single folded page, in neat, cursive handwriting. Dear Ezra, you do not know me, but I know you. I was a flight attendant once, long ago, and I saw something similar happen. Not a slap, but a silence, a dismissal, a cold shoulder that said, "You don't belong here." It happened to a boy who looked like you. I didn't speak up, and I have regretted that moment every day of my life. When I saw your video, I cried, not just because it hurt to watch, but because you reminded me of something I had forgotten. That dignity does not require volume, that courage can come in stillness, and that sometimes the smallest voice speaks the loudest truth. Thank you for reminding the world. We needed it, and so did I. With quiet admiration, Ezra read it twice, then a third time. He handed it to his mother without a word. Yvette read it slowly, and her eyes filled before she even reached the bottom. Malcolm returned from the balcony and saw them both sitting silently. Ezra handed him the letter. After he finished reading, Malcolm folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. Some things don't need to be shared online, he said softly. Some things are just for the soul. Ezra nodded. I want to write back. We don't have an address. Doesn't matter. So he did. He wrote back on plain white paper. Dear El, thank you for your letter. I don't know what you saw all those years ago, but I want you to know something. You matter too. It's never too late to be brave, even if it's quiet, even if it's just a letter. I hope wherever you are, you feel a little lighter now, because I do. Thank you. Ezra. He placed the letter in the same drawer as the one he received, side by side, one beginning, one reply, the next day. Rachel Mendez knocked on the Dorians' front door. She had taken leave from the airline, but not because they asked, because she needed to. She stood in the doorway, holding a small wrapped package. I hope I'm not intruding. Yvette welcomed her in with a smile. Ezra stepped into the room and blinked in surprise. You're here. Rachel nodded and smiled gently. I wanted to give you something. She handed him the box. Ezra opened it carefully. Inside was a folded pilot's wings pin, the kind they give to children on their first flight. But it was old, worn at the edges. He looked up. This was yours. Rachel nodded. My first flight. I kept it for years, but I think it belongs to someone else now. Ezra held the pin tightly. Thank you. They sat down together. Rachel turned to Malcolm. I've been talking with Nadine. She wants me to help train new flight crews. Talk about what happened, how to prevent it. Malcolm nodded slowly. Are you ready for that? Rachel looked at Ezra, then back to Malcolm. I wasn't, but I am now. That evening, Ezra pinned the wings to his backpack strap. Not because he wanted to be a pilot, but because it reminded him that dignity did not have to be loud, and change did not have to be quick, but it had to be steady, it had to be real, and it had to start somewhere. The call came at 6:14 in the morning. Malcolm was still in his robe, sipping coffee at the kitchen table, reading Ezra's speech draft for an upcoming youth event. The number was familiar, not personal, but internal, board level. He answered. A voice on the other end said only 2 words. You need to see this. No names, no introductions. Just the weight of those 6 syllables landing like a stone in Malcolm's chest. 35 minutes later, he was seated in the corner office of one of the airline's senior compliance officers, across from a man he had only met twice before, Martin Leeds, Director of Risk and Internal Review. Martin looked tired. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept in days. He tapped a folder on the table. HR buried a file. Malcolm said nothing. Martin opened the folder and slid it across the table. Inside 2 prior incident reports, both involving Sharon Pike, both involving black passengers. Neither escalated to violence, but both carried the same undertones. Dismissive language, refusal of service, dehumanizing conduct. Both times, complaints had been submitted. Both times, they were marked inconclusive. Malcolm flipped through the pages slowly, jaw tightening with every line. How long has this been hidden? Martin sighed. Over 4 years, buried under a code called triage low priority, used mostly for complaints that might make PR nervous. Malcolm leaned back in the chair. You're telling me this airline had a pattern and protected it? Martin looked away. I'm telling you some people in this company knew and let it continue. Malcolm let that sit in the air for a moment. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Who? Martin hesitated, then reached for another file. This one was thinner. Inside was a single email thread. At the top, a name Malcolm knew too well. Louis Granger, Chief Strategy Officer, and Malcolm's personal liaison for investor relations. Granger had once toasted Malcolm's investment over drinks in Midtown, called him a visionary, a partner in progress. But now, his name sat at the top of a chain that read, Re-Pike Incident, Recommend Silent Handling. She's union protected. Keep this quiet. Malcolm closed the file. The room was quiet. Martin spoke softly. If this goes public, the company could face serious exposure. You'll be named, investors will scatter, stock will tumble. Malcolm stood. I'm not worried about the stock. Martin looked up. Then what are you worried about? Malcolm's voice was steady. My son. That afternoon. Malcolm walked into a board meeting uninvited. No one said a word as he entered. He dropped the folder on the table, watched the suits around him glance nervously toward Granger. This is not about a PR problem, Malcolm began. This is about a moral collapse. Granger stood, forcing a smile. Malcolm, I think you're overstepping your role here. We've handled this. We've apologized. We're restructuring crew training. Malcolm cut him off. You knew. You had prior complaints. You covered it. Granger's smile faded. The room shifted uncomfortably. Be careful what you accuse. Malcolm, you're not just a father in this room. You're a stakeholder. You represent billions. Malcolm stepped closer. And what good is ownership if you stay silent while injustice grows under your own roof? No one answered. He turned to the board chair. Effective immediately. I want a full audit of internal HR complaint handling. Every incident tagged triage low priority gets reopened, reviewed publicly, with accountability. The chair cleared his throat. That's highly irregular. Malcolm? So is slapping a child and getting away with it. Granger's voice grew louder. If you go through with this, we will lose partners, gate access, routes. Malcolm faced him directly. Then we rebuild with people who deserve to fly. Later that evening, Malcolm sat alone in his office. The sun had set. The city lights glowed below. He stared out the window, exhausted. The door creaked open gently. Ezra walked in. "You okay?" he asked. Malcolm smiled faintly. "Working on it." Ezra stepped inside and sat across from him. "I heard you went to the meeting." Malcolm nodded. "And I heard it got loud. It needed to." Ezra fidgeted with a pen on the desk. "I saw some of the comments online. People think you're making trouble." Malcolm looked at his son. "I'm not making trouble. Ezra, I'm making change." Ezra nodded slowly, then said something that caught Malcolm off guard. "Can I go with you next time?" Malcolm tilted his head. "To the boardroom, no. Wherever they talk about what happened. The meetings, the policies, the decisions." Malcolm studied his son's face. There was no fear there, only quiet fire. "You sure?" Ezra gave a small smile. "You said if you have a seat at the table, you use it. I think I'm ready to try." Malcolm's eyes filled slightly, not from sadness, from awe. "You are more than ready." That night, Ezra wrote something new in his journal. Not a speech, not a story, just one sentence. Change doesn't come from anger. It comes from remembering who got hurt and deciding not to look away anymore. The ballroom at the Hilton was packed. Press badges, camera crews, flashbulbs flickering like lightning in a bottle. The airline had called it a public accountability forum, a fancy name for what everyone knew was damage control. But Malcolm hadn't agreed to attend for appearances. He had agreed to attend to draw a line, one that could not be crossed again. Beside him, Ezra stood in a navy blue suit, slightly oversized in the sleeves, but still neat. His curls were combed, his posture straight. He was calm, but Malcolm could feel the tension in his small hands as they clasped together. "Remember," Malcolm whispered before they walked on stage, "you're not performing. You're just being you." Ezra nodded. The lights dimmed. A moderator welcomed the crowd, introduced a panel of executives and policy consultants, then welcomed Malcolm Dorian and his son Ezra to the stage. The applause was polite at first, then sincere, then loud, not because of celebrity, but because of courage. Malcolm stepped to the podium first. He looked out at the sea of faces, journalists, employees, parents, some with arms folded, others with eyes wide open. He began slowly. 3 months ago, my son boarded a flight with his mother and experienced something that, for many black children in this country, is not new, but this time it was caught on camera. He paused, and for the first time, the world had to look. He spoke for 7 minutes about accountability, about patterns, about silence as complicity. Then he stepped aside and turned to Ezra. "Go ahead," he said gently. Ezra approached the microphone. He blinked against the brightness of the lights. Then he began. "My name is Ezra Dorian. I'm 10 years old, and I didn't ask to be here." The room went still. "But I'm here because something happened that shouldn't have, and I'm standing here because I want to help make sure it doesn't happen again." He took a breath. Not just to kids who look like me. To anyone. There was something in the way he said it without bitterness, without dramatics, just truth. It settled over the room like a quiet wave. I used to think being brave meant being loud, but sometimes it means staying calm when everything else wants to make you small. He stepped back. The room stood to applaud. Cameras clicked like clockwork. But then something unexpected happened. From the back of the room, a woman stood up. She wore a simple black dress and a badge clipped to her collar. Her hair was gray, pulled into a tight bun. She stepped forward, cleared her throat, and asked the moderator for the microphone. There was a pause. Then, reluctantly, It was handed to her. "My name is Linda Carlton," she said. "I've been a flight attendant for 27 years. People turned to look. Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not back down. "I flew with Sharon Pike 3 times. I saw her behavior. I reported it. Nothing was done." The room hushed. I was told she had seniority, that she was blunt but harmless. But I knew better, and I said nothing louder. I should have done more. She looked directly at Ezra. "I'm sorry." Ezra blinked. Linda continued, "I don't work for the airline anymore. I left last year, but I came today to say what I couldn't say then." She turned to the board members. "Some of you knew. Some of you looked away." Murmurs swept through the crowd. But that boy up there didn't look away. Neither did his father. She placed the microphone gently on the table and walked out, not waiting for a reaction. No one moved for a full minute. Then Nadine Parks, the executive overseeing reform, stood and took the microphone. "In light of what you've all heard today," she said clearly, "we are launching a full investigation not only into this incident, but into the systemic failures that allowed it to happen, effective immediately. We will open all closed complaint cases flagged under low-priority triage." She looked at Malcolm. "We will publish results publicly, and we invite Mr. Dorian to co-chair the Independent Oversight Committee." Malcolm didn't nod. He simply said, "Good. Later." Backstage, Ezra sat with a glass of orange juice, legs swinging off the side of a high chair. Malcolm placed a hand on his shoulder. "You okay?" Ezra nodded. "Did you know she was going to stand up, the lady know?" "I didn't. I liked that she looked at me when she said it." Malcolm smiled. "So did I." Ezra leaned back, letting out a long breath. It felt big. Malcolm sat beside him. It was. They rode home in silence for a while, the city lights blinking across the windows of the car. Ezra finally broke the quiet. Dad, yeah. Do you think if that lady had spoken up years ago, the slap would have never happened? Malcolm didn't answer right away. "I don't know. But I do know her speaking up now helps stop it from happening again." Ezra looked out the window. "I think I want to keep doing this. Helping. You already are." Malcolm took his son's hand. "Every time you tell the truth, you help someone else be brave enough to tell theirs." Ezra nodded. He didn't smile, not because he was sad, because he understood. Some things weren't about being happy. They were about being human and telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. 3 months later, the world had moved on. At least, that's how it seemed. New headlines filled the airwaves, new crises, new distractions. But for Ezra, the shift was slower, quieter. It lived in the little things, like the way his classmates no longer looked at him like glass, like the teachers who added a section on racial empathy to the social studies curriculum, like the mural on the side of the school library, painted by the 7th graders, titled "Stillness is Strength." It showed a small boy standing in front of a giant wave, calm as the sea tried to swallow him whole. Ezra had never told anyone, but he went to that mural every morning before class, just stood there for a minute, then exhaled and walked inside. At home, the air was lighter too. Malcolm's task force had become a national model. Airlines across the country began adopting independent oversight. Complaints could no longer be buried in digital filing cabinets. Every crew now received immersive empathy training, not just once, quarterly. And the woman who had once struck Ezra, her name no longer mattered. What mattered was what changed after. One Sunday morning, while the sun spilled through the kitchen window and the house smelled like cinnamon rolls and lavender soap. A package arrived. No sender listed. Just a small box wrapped in recycled paper. Yvette opened it with cautious hands as Ezra and Malcolm looked on. Inside was a card. Typed. Nothing fancy. It read Ezra. I was the captain on your flight that day. I saw what happened. I froze. And I've spent every day since then wishing I hadn't. I've worked 27 years in the sky. That moment grounded me. I've since stepped down from my post. Not out of punishment, but out of reflection. I want to thank you for your calm, your courage, and for holding up a mirror that many of us needed. In the box is something I received the day I got my wings. I never gave it to anyone until now, because some people fly with engines and others with grace. Thank you. D. Koenig Ezra looked up, confused. Captain Koenig Malcolm nodded slowly. He flew the plane that day. Yvette reached into the box and gently pulled out the contents. A small silver token, engraved with a single phrase, "Honor lives in the still ones." Ezra turned the coin over in his hands. It was cold, heavy. He closed his fingers around it, and then, quietly, tucked it into his pocket. Later that week, Ezra was invited to speak at a youth summit for justice and reform. Not a press event, not a school assembly, just kids, sitting in a circle, each with a story. Some had been followed in stores, some had been told to tone it down, some had been silenced. Ezra listened first, then spoke, but not about what happened on the plane, not even about what came after. He spoke about how it felt, to be stared at, to be doubted, to be the one who had to make other people feel comfortable in his own skin. And the moment he stopped doing that was the moment he became free. One boy raised his hand. How do you stay calm? Ezra smiled. I don't always. The room laughed gently. Then he said something he hadn't planned. But I remind myself, the louder they expect you to be, the more powerful your silence becomes. Afterward, the kids didn't ask for autographs. They just sat beside him, shoulders touching, no cameras, just presence. And that's what Ezra would remember most. Not the headlines, not the panels or news clips, but that quiet moment where everyone knew they weren't alone. A few weeks later, Malcolm found a folded paper on his desk. Ezra's handwriting. It read, Dear Dad, thank you for standing when I couldn't, for speaking when I was too tired, for listening even when the world shouted. I know things are changing, and I know they'll keep trying not to. But if you're beside me, I'm not afraid. Love. Ezra Malcolm folded the note slowly and placed it in the same drawer where the first anonymous letter still lived. Side by side. A beginning and a becoming. That evening, Ezra stood on the rooftop balcony, looking out at the city with the glow of late spring. Yvette joined him. She didn't say anything. She just wrapped her arms around him and held him to her chest. He stayed there for a while, then finally asked, Do you think it's over? She smiled. No, but we're ahead now. Ezra nodded. A soft breeze passed between them, and for the first time in a long time, the world felt still, not silent. Still, because stillness wasn't weakness. Stillness was choosing not to match the chaos around you. Stillness was power with intention. And in that stillness, Ezra Dorian had changed more than an airline. He had reminded a fractured world what dignity looked like, what it felt like, and what it could become when passed gently, from one person to the next. Ezra never asked to become a symbol. He just wanted to fly home with his mom, But when silence struck louder than words, he stood firm, not with rage, but with quiet resolve. And that silence, it echoed across boardrooms, headlines, and hearts. This is more than a story about a slap on a plane. It's about what we allow when we say nothing. It's about the cost of comfort, the price of silence, and the courage of a child who reminded us all dignity doesn't have to shout to be heard. Ezra's story is a mirror, one that asks, what kind of world are we building and who gets to feel safe inside it? So if this story moved you, if it made you angry, if it made you proud, if it made you feel, then don't let it stop here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that shine a light in the silence. Because change doesn't begin with noise. It begins with you. And we've only just begun.